Snow drifted through the dark sky like falling ash as I crossed the state line. That night, the wipers thumped steady and slow, keeping rhythm with the sound of my own breathing. My name is Mara Whitfield. I am 34, and I work in compliance and corporate risk in Seattle. Before I continue this story, let me know what you are doing while listening to my story in the comments below. For me, I was driving home through a snowstorm, hands tight on the wheel, thinking I was on my way to Christmas dinner with my family. I had no idea that one text message waiting on my phone would change everything I believed about love, loyalty, and what it means to belong. The highway was nearly empty. The heater hummed hard, fighting the cold air that crept through the doors. My back seat was filled with wrapped gifts, the kind that looked expensive but meant something small. A leather journal for my sister Julia, a vintage cookbook for Mom, and for Dad, an antique compass I'd found at a small maritime shop downtown. The tag read, "To Dad for when you finally find your way back." I thought it was clever at the time. The pie on the passenger seat smelled of sugar and butter, still warm from the oven, pecan his favorite. For a moment, I imagined his face softening the way it used to when I was little. Back then, I still believed I could earn his approval. Before the divorce. Before everything turned into something to compare. 6:45 in the evening. I was late. I texted him before leaving the office just to be polite. "On my way. Roads are bad, but I'll be there soon. Don't start without me." I even added a snowflake emoji, a stupid attempt at warmth. That was always our pattern. I reached out. He stayed polite. As I turned onto Cedar Hill Road, the street where I'd grown up, I slowed down the tires, crunching over fresh snow. The old neighborhood looked like a Christmas card, golden windows glowing through the dark. The Whitfield house sat on the hill, trimmed with white lights, proud and perfect. For a moment, I smiled. Then my phone buzzed on the console. I looked down, expecting something simple like "drive safe" or "glad you're coming." The message was short, neat, and final. "It's fine, Mara. You don't need to come. It's just immediate family this year." I read it twice. The words didn't make sense at first, like a line from someone else's life. Immediate family, as if I wasn't his oldest child, as if divorce had erased my bloodline. My breath fogged the glass. I could almost hear him saying it out loud in that calm, managerial tone he used when firing someone he thought beneath him. My eyes lifted to the house. The dining room glowed like a stage set. The chandelier spread gold light across the long table. Crystal and silver caught the shimmer. Mom moved in and out of the frame, her posture sharp, perfect. Julia sat near Dad, laughing, her blonde hair curled soft, wearing that clotted cream sweater she always wore for photos. She leaned close to the man beside her, a face I knew too well from company files and online articles. Mark Reynolds, Julia's fiancé. Mark stood up to help her with her chair. He looked the part, pressed, shirt-tailored jacket, the kind of confidence that made men like my dad lean forward. Dad was smiling, chin-high eyes bright with pride, the same expression he'd never once turned toward me. The seat to his left, my old spot, was taken by Mark. That image stayed frozen behind the glass. My family arranged perfectly and me outside, headlights dimming against the snow. I sat there for a long time. My fingers trembled, not from the cold, but from the kind of humiliation that burns through skin, the kind that says you should have known better. I thought of Mom's voice when I called last week. "Oh, honey, Julia's fiancé has been such a blessing for your dad's business. He's helping with some investments, bringing new energy. Maybe when things settle, we'll all get together." Her tone was polite, distant, the same tone she used with telemarketers. I should have known something was wrong. Dad's company, Whitfield Construction, had been bleeding money for years. I'd heard rumors of bad contracts, inflated budgets, the market turning, but he'd always blamed everyone else. The economy, his partners, even me. "Maybe if you joined the business instead of playing detective for a living, we'd be fine," he once said. He never understood what I did. Corporate risk analysis meant nothing to a man who measured worth by physical things. Buildings, trucks, land. He used to tell people Julia inherited his charm and I got the Ellis brain, which sounded like a compliment until you realized he meant it as a warning. My stomach tightened. I turned off the engine. Snowflakes melted against the windshield and refroze as tiny veins of ice. I picked up the phone again. There was nothing else from him. No apology. Just silence, then another buzz. A different name flashed on the screen, Lisa Chang, my colleague. "That file you flagged on Sterling West? You might be right. Numbers don't add up. Call me Monday." My chest went still. Sterling West. That was the investment group Mark Reynolds worked for. I had reviewed a report about them 2 months earlier, a flagged client connected to suspicious wire transfers. I remembered the hesitation when I'd looked up the name and saw the partner list, Mark Reynolds, Chief Operating Officer. I didn't file a formal claim because the connection was too thin. And because my dad had just posted a photo online, excited to welcome Sterling West as a new partner in growth. I stared at the screen. The phone light faded. Inside the house, Dad raised his glass. They toasted. Laughter carried faintly through the cold. My breath fogged again, then cleared, revealing my reflection in the glass. Pale, calm, detached. It hit me then they hadn't forgotten me. They had erased me. I felt the first sting of something sharp and clean behind my ribs. Not sadness, not anger, clarity. If Dad didn't want me at the table, fine. If he thought Mark was his salvation, fine. I would let them have their perfect dinner, their perfect illusion. But if Sterling West was what I suspected, if those reports weren't a coincidence, then the truth would come out. And when it did, I wouldn't need to say a word. I started the engine again. The headlights cut through the snow, illuminating the perfect white house one last time. Behind the glass, Julia leaned in close to Mark, whispering something that made him laugh. Dad looked proud, Mom looked pleased, and for the first time, I didn't feel small. As I pulled away, my hands were steady on the wheel. Somewhere between that house and the dark road ahead, the humiliation turned into something else, a quiet, precise kind of resolve, the kind that doesn't shout, the kind that waits. The road stretched ahead like a long ribbon of glass, slick with snow and streaked by the reflection of my headlights. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than I meant to. The house behind me faded into the white blur of distance, its warm lights shrinking until they disappeared completely. For the first few miles, I drove without music or thought, just the sound of tires grinding over packed snow and the faint rattle of something loose in the trunk. The words from my dad's text kept circling back, as if they were carved into the glass of my mind. It's just immediate family this year. My chest felt heavy, like something had settled there and refused to move. I could have pulled over, called him, demanded an explanation. But what would he say that I hadn't already heard in other forms for years? He would tell me not to make it emotional, not to embarrass myself. He would tell me to grow up. The more the miles passed, the clearer it became that he had meant it. He didn't want me there. Not because of space or tension, but because my absence made his image cleaner. A perfect family dinner for a man who built his reputation on appearances. Richard Ellis, the visionary who rose from a small-town carpenter to the head of Ellis Development Group. A man who spent decades convincing old money families that he belonged among them. And Julia, his golden child, was the living proof of his success. The thought of her laugh tonight, the way she tilted her head toward Mark, stung more than I wanted to admit. I used to protect her. When we were kids, I took the blame for the things she broke. I was the serious one, the quiet one, the one who understood when Mom said some girls were meant to shine and some to support. I never realized they meant it literally. The snow thickened, falling faster. I slowed down, blinkers flashing when I reached a turn that curved along the edge of the forest. My phone lit up again, this time with a missed call from Lisa. I hesitated, then pressed play on the voicemail. Her voice came through fuzzy but urgent. Mara, I dug deeper into that Sterling West report. There's overlap with Ellis Development. Looks like a shared bank intermediary in the Caymans. You might want to double-check those filings before the quarter closes. A gust of wind shook the car. I pulled into a rest stop and killed the engine, sitting in the sudden silence. My reflection in the dark window looked calm, but my pulse wasn't. Sterling West. The same company my dad was now calling a partner. The same man sitting at his table tonight. It wasn't just a coincidence. My instincts had been right months ago. I'd flagged inconsistencies in their quarterly submissions, transfers just below reporting thresholds. I'd mentioned it in a meeting, but no one wanted to touch it. Too many connections, too much money involved. I let it go back then, partly because I didn't want to admit how personal it felt. Now, sitting there with snow hissing against the roof, it didn't feel like a coincidence anymore. It felt like a pattern. I scrolled through my old emails until I found it. The flagged file still marked unresolved. The last update was dated October. Mark Reynolds listed as Chief Operating Officer, overseeing investment expansion across Pacific Northwest infrastructure. I remembered the glossy photos from the press release, him shaking hands with my dad, him promising growth and innovation. A small laugh slipped out, sharp and humorless. Growth and innovation. My dad had always fallen for the right buzzwords. He called it vision. I called it desperation. I leaned back in the seat, staring through the windshield. The snow kept falling heavy and steady, coating everything in white. Somewhere inside that house, Julia was probably opening gifts, her ring catching the light. My dad was probably toasting to new beginnings. And I was sitting in a frozen car at a highway rest stop, realizing I had just witnessed the start of their downfall. But I wasn't angry. Not anymore. What settled in me wasn't rage. It was a kind of quiet calculation. The same instinct that made me good at my job. When you see risk, you document it. When you see deceit, you collect proof. I opened my laptop, the screen glow filling the car. The Wi-Fi was weak, but I tethered to my phone, pulling up the system portal for client filings. The cursor blinked at me, steady and patient. I began typing a note to myself, a breadcrumb trail in case things turned ugly later. Potential conflict of interest between Sterling West and Ellis Development. Overlapping accounts. Cayman intermediary possible shell transfer. I stopped, then added personal connection to Mark Reynolds, confirmed. Proceed with caution. A memory flickered, something small but sharp. 2 months ago, Julia called me out of nowhere, giddy about her engagement. She mentioned Mark's new deal with Dad's company and asked if I'd heard of him. I told her I had, that I'd reviewed some of his company's reports. There had been a pause, the kind of silence that meant she was smiling on the other end. Mara, don't overthink it. Not everything's a red flag. The irony made my lips tighten. Not everything's a red flag. I should have known she wouldn't listen. None of them ever did. My phone buzzed again. Another message, this one from Mom. Short, polite, devastating in its simplicity. Sorry you couldn't make it, dear. We'll save you some pie. For a second, my throat burned. The same pie sitting cold beside me. I closed my eyes, then opened them again. The cold outside no longer bothered me. It grounded me. I put the car in gear and pulled back onto the road. The snow had eased, leaving behind a faint silver mist that clung to the trees. The road stretched ahead, dark but clear. The world felt smaller, quieter, like the air right before a storm. I drove without direction for a while, just letting the city lights reappear in the distance. Seattle was 2 hours away, but I didn't care about the time. I needed the hum of the engine, the motion, the sound of something steady when everything else was breaking apart. Somewhere along the drive, I remembered something Dad said when I was 15. I had won a regional debate competition, and he told me impressive. But words don't build empires, Mara. I thought it was just a lesson in practicality. Now, decades later, I understood. He never valued integrity. He valued optics. Julia made him look successful. I made him uncomfortable. The snow finally stopped. I took the next exit toward the motel strip near Ridgefield, a line of flickering signs and quiet parking lots. I parked under a buzzing light outside a small lodge. My body ached as I stepped into the cold boots crunching on ice. The air smelled like gasoline and winter. Inside, the clerk barely looked up when I handed over my card. The room was plain but clean. I locked the door, set my bag down, and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands were still trembling, but it wasn't scary. It was adrenaline focus, the spark that comes when something inside you finally wakes up. On the nightstand sat a small notepad. I picked up the pen and wrote 3 words, "Follow the money," then underlined it once. The heater hummed softly. Outside, trucks passed on the highway, their lights streaking across the wall for an instant before fading. I sat there, still in my coat, staring at the words. For years, I tried to prove my worth to my family by being the dutiful daughter, the forgiving one, the one who stayed silent. But silence had only ever protected them, not anymore. I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and lay back, eyes open in the dark. Tomorrow I will start tracing every number, every contract, every name. And when the truth surfaced, it wouldn't just clear my name. It would undo everything my dad thought he had built. That was the last thought I had before sleep finally took me. Morning light seeped through the motel curtains, pale and thin, the kind that makes everything look colder than it is. I woke with my clothes still on and a stiffness in my neck that reminded me how little I had slept. For a few seconds, I forgot where I was. Then I saw the notebook on the nightstand with 3 words written in heavy ink, "Follow the money." Coffee from the lobby tasted like burnt rubber, but it helped. I opened my laptop on the small table by the window. The motel Wi-Fi stuttered, but I managed to log into the internal database. My hands moved automatically, muscle memory guiding each step. Search, filter, cross-reference. It was the same process I used every day at work, except this time, the stakes were personal. Sterling West's filing sat in front of me, clean on the surface, too clean. I scrolled through bank statements and expense summaries until I found a line that made me stop. Wire transfer, $200,000, routed through a Cayman intermediary. The recipient was listed as Ellis Holdings Development LLC, my dad's company. A chill crawled through my chest. It wasn't proof yet, but it was enough to raise every instinct I had. I double-checked the date, November 15th. The same week, Julia had called to tell me Mark had saved Dad's business with an incredible new deal. I closed my eyes for a moment, steadying my breath. It was all right there. The man my dad trusted, the man sitting at his table last night, was moving money through offshore accounts tied to Dad's company. Whether my dad knew or not, he was in deep. I opened my email and typed a message to Lisa. I found the link between Sterling West and Ellis Holdings. "Keep this confidential for now. I'll explain later. I haven't hit send yet. Something told me this couldn't just stay in emails. By 10 o'clock, the snow outside had melted into slush. I checked out of the motel and drove to the office, even though it was Christmas morning and the building was mostly dark. My badge still worked. Inside, the hum of fluorescent lights filled the empty space. I sat at my desk, logged in again, and started downloading public filings and archived data. Every document I opened led to another question. Every clean line in the report looked like a lie wearing a pressed suit. Halfway through, my phone rang. It was Julia. I hesitated but answered. "Mara, where are you? Dad said you didn't come last night." Her voice carried that polished tone, the one she used when pretending everything was fine. "I got your message," I said. "He didn't want me there." She sighed softly, the kind of sigh that makes it sound like you're the one being unreasonable. "You know how he is. He just wanted to keep things small this year." "It's been a rough quarter." "Julia," I said quietly, "how much do you know about Mark's work with Dad's company?" "What do you mean?" She laughed, but there was a thin edge in it. "He's helping restructure some investments, that's all. He's been amazing." "Why?" "Because I've seen some of the numbers," I said, "and they don't add up." The silence on the line was sharp. Then she said, "You're doing it again. You always think you're the smartest one in the room, always digging for problems that aren't there. You need to let Dad handle his own life. He's not handling it," I said. "He's being used." "You sound jealous," she snapped. "You hate that he finally respects someone who isn't you." That one landed, but I didn't let it show. "Julia, just tell me something. Does Mark ever ask Dad to sign documents without review? Anything to do with offshore accounts?" "Stop," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "This is insane. You always twist things. You've been like this since we were kids. You can't stand it when someone else is happy." I wanted to argue, to remind her that I had spent my entire life cleaning up her messes. But what was the point? People believe what feels good, not what's true. "I hope you're right about him," I said. "I really do." She hung up without answering. The silence after that call felt heavier than before. I turned back to my laptop, jaw tight. The pattern of transfers grew clearer with every search. Money flowed from Sterling West into dummy corporations, then into Ellis Holdings. It was a laundering network disguised as a partnership. Around noon, I heard a voice behind me. "Didn't expect to see you here today." I turned. It was Daniel Price, one of the senior auditors. He looked surprised to see me, just catching up on something I said. He leaned against the cubicle wall, sipping from a paper cup. "You always work holidays. You need to learn to relax, Mara. Maybe next year." He nodded, then gestured to the folders open on my screen. "Are you digging into Sterling West again? I heard that it's connected to Ellis Development somehow." I felt a prick of unease. "Who told you that?" He shrugged. "People talk. Just be careful. That company's got friends in high places." When he walked away, I stared at his back until he disappeared down the hall. It wasn't paranoia anymore. Someone else knew. That meant time was running out. I downloaded the last of the reports, zipped the files, and backed them up on a secure drive. Then I printed one page, the summary that tied everything together: transaction codes, routing numbers, signatures. At the bottom, the name R. Ellis appeared beside a digital stamp. I stared at the signature. My dad's name. His pride, his identity, his downfall waiting in black ink. The thought that he might be an unwilling participant should have comforted me, but it didn't. I knew him too well. If Mark had promised to make him look successful again, Dad would have signed anything. Pride was always his weakness. As I packed up, my phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. "Stop looking. Some things are above your pay grade." The message made my hands go cold. No name, no context, just a threat wrapped in casual arrogance. I deleted it, then powered off the phone. Fear tried to surface, but I pushed it down. I had spent years auditing corporations that hid behind power and lawyers. This was no different. The only rule was simple: don't blink first. By the time I left the office, the streets were quiet again. Christmas decorations still glowing faintly in the daylight. My reflection followed me in every glass window, pale and unreadable. I didn't know yet how deep this would go or how much it would cost. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. If they thought silence would keep me away, they had underestimated me again. I turned the corner toward my car, the wind biting through my coat. The world smelled like wet asphalt and cold metal, the kind of scent that marks the beginning of something irreversible. The engine started with a low hum. I didn't look back as I pulled onto the road. The city ahead blurred in the fog. The truth was coming, and for once I wasn't running from it. Rain fell in thin sheets the next morning, washing away what was left of the snow. I drove to the office early before anyone else arrived. The streets empty except for delivery trucks and the occasional jogger. My mind felt sharp to awake, the kind of alertness that comes after a night of restless sleep. I hadn't stopped thinking about that text. Stop looking. Some things are above your pay grade. Whoever sent it knew exactly what I was doing, which meant the story went deeper than I thought. Inside the building, the air was cold and still. I made coffee in the break room and sat at my desk, opening the secure drive I had saved the night before. The files loaded slowly, row after row of numbers and transaction codes. I followed the trail again, line by line, until a new pattern appeared. There were more transfers than I had seen, small ones scattered over months, routed through fake subcontractors registered under names that meant nothing. Except one, Hartwell Consulting. It wasn't a name I recognized, but a search pulled up a registration address in Bellevue, 2 blocks from where Sterling West listed its headquarters. I clicked through a few more pages until a signature at the bottom caught my eye. Mark Reynolds. I leaned back in my chair, my pulse steadying into focus. He wasn't just involved. He was controlling the flow. The money moved through Hartwell, then to Ellis Development, then out again into offshore accounts. On paper, it looked like legitimate consulting fees. In reality, it was siphoning. I picked up my phone and called Lisa. She answered on the second ring. "Mara, are you still on this?" "It's the holiday week. I need your help," I said. "Check the vendor history for Hartwell Consulting. I think it's linked to Sterling West." There was a pause, then a sigh. "That's sensitive data, Mara. You know how it looks if someone pulls those records without authorization?" "I'll take the risk," I said quietly. "Just look." I heard her typing. Hartwell Consulting LLC, I registered 9 months ago. 2 contracts with Ellis Development, both signed by Richard Ellis, each worth $500,000. Looks like a fast-track approval. "That's not standard." My throat tightened. "Can you send me a copy of the approvals?" She hesitated. "I can't email them. I'll print and drop them in your office box. After that, I'm out. Be careful. This smells bad." After the call, I sat still, listening to the rain against the windows. My dad had signed those contracts. Whether he knew what they were didn't matter. He'd let Mark take control of his business, his reputation, and probably his future. Around noon, I drove to Bellevue. The address for Hartwell Consulting led me to a sleek office building with tinted glass and a lobby that smelled like new carpet. I told the receptionist I had a meeting with Mark Reynolds. She smiled, checked her computer, and said, "Mr. Reynolds isn't in today. Would you like to leave a message?" "No," I said, forcing a smile. "I'll catch him next time." I walked back outside, pulled my coat tighter, and took out my phone. Across the street was a coffee shop with a clear view of the building. I ordered a drink and sat near the window, pretending to scroll through my phone while I watched the doors. After 20 minutes, a familiar car pulled up. Mark stepped out, talking on his phone, his other hand adjusting his tie. I watched as he greeted a man in a dark coat, handed him an envelope, and walked inside. The exchange was quick practiced. Whatever he was doing, it wasn't innocent. I snapped a photo through the window, the image grainy but clear enough. Mark with the envelope, Hartwell's address in the background. Evidence, or at least a start. I left before they could notice me. Back in my car, I replayed everything in my mind, the pieces fitting together. My dad's failing business, the sudden rescue, the money trail, the offshore accounts, the threats. It was all connected, and if I didn't act soon, it would be too late. As I drove back to Seattle, I called Julia again. She didn't pick up, so I left a message. "Julia, I need to see you." "It's important. It's about Mark." No answer came that day. Instead, around 6 that evening, my phone rang. It was my dad. I hadn't heard his voice since the night of the dinner. "Mara," he said, calm but cold. "I just got off the phone with Julia. She's upset." "What did you tell her about Mark?" "I told her the truth," I said. "That he's moving money through your company." He laughed softly, the kind of laugh that cuts more than it comforts. "You always think you know everything. You don't understand how business works. Mark has connections that can pull us out of a bad position. You're making trouble out of jealousy. Dad, you're being played. You've signed documents tied to offshore accounts. Do you even know what's in them?" His tone hardened. "Watch yourself, Mara. You might be my daughter, but this is my company. Don't get involved in things beyond your reach." "Then read what you're signing," I said, my voice rising despite myself, "because when this blows up, they'll drag your name through the mud, and you'll deserve it for being blind." The line went silent. For a second, I thought he'd hung up. Then he said quietly, "You always were your grandmother's girl. Cold, self-righteous, never be loyal." The words hit harder than I expected. Then the call ended. I sat there gripping the phone, the anger slow and deep. He didn't see me as his daughter anymore, just a mirror reflecting what he didn't want to face. When I finally looked up, the city had gone dark. Lights shimmered off wet pavement, the streets humming with evening traffic. I took a long breath, steady and deliberate. They wanted silence. They wanted obedience. But I had spent my life giving both, and it had cost me everything. Now I was done being quiet. I turned the key, the engine rumbling to life, and pulled into the stream of cars heading toward downtown. The rain had stopped, but the clouds hung low and heavy, as if waiting for the storm to start again. That night I sat on my apartment floor, surrounded by printouts, my laptop glowing in the dim light. Pages of transactions, corporate filings, and email chains lay scattered across the rug. Every line pointed to the same truth. Mark was running a shell operation, and my dad had signed his company straight into it. The documents Lisa left in my office box confirmed it. 2 contracts each signed with Dad's name, both wired through Hartwell Consulting. I read them again, my fingers tracing the signatures. The ink was uneven, shakier than usual. Maybe he hadn't even read what he signed. Maybe he just wanted to believe someone could save him. But belief wasn't going to save him now. The clock on the wall read 9:30 when my phone buzzed. Julia's name flashed on the screen. For a second, I considered ignoring it, then answered. "What did you do?" she demanded. Her voice was tight, trembling. "Dad's furious." "Mark said you're spreading lies to your office, trying to ruin his name." "I'm not spreading lies," I said quietly. "I have proof." "Proof of what? That you can't stand to see anyone else succeed?" I laughed, softly tired. "Julia, this isn't about me. Mark is moving money through offshore accounts tied to Ellis Development. I traced every transfer. You can come see the files yourself." "You're sick," she said. "You need help. You've been alone too long and now you're making up conspiracies." "I wish I were," I said. "But when the government starts asking questions, you'll remember I warned you." She started crying. "Do you ever stop? You've been jealous your whole life. Dad told me how hard it was to love you, how cold you were. Maybe he's right." Something in me went quiet. I didn't say another word. The line stayed open long enough for me to hear her sob, then she hung up. For a moment, I just sat there staring at the phone. The weight of it all pressed down hard. I wanted to feel anger, but what came instead was clarity. I couldn't save them anymore. They didn't want to save. I gathered the papers and slid them into a folder. I needed leverage, not emotion. The only way to make this right was to make it public. The next morning, I drove to the office early again. I scanned the contracts and uploaded them to a secure cloud folder, labeling everything in code. Then I reached out to an old contact, a journalist named Ben Hayes from the Seattle Chronicle. He'd covered financial fraud cases before and he owed me a favor. When he picked up, his voice sounded rough with sleep. "Mara, it's early." "What's going on? I have something you'll want to see," I said. "It's about Sterling West and Ellis Development. Fraud laundering offshore accounts. I can't give it all over the phone." He was silent for a beat. "You're sure?" "Yes. But it's messy, and it involves people with power." "I'll meet you," he said. "Send me a location." We met at a small diner outside the city, a quiet place where no one paid attention. I brought a flash drive with copies of everything. Ben sat across from me, his coffee untouched as he listened. "Your dad's name is on these," he said after a while. "If this goes public, it'll destroy him." "I know," I said. "But if I stay silent, it destroys me." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "I'll start digging, but once this moves, you can't stop it." "Are you ready for that?" "I've been ready for years," I said. When I left the diner, the air smelled like rain and diesel. I stood by my car for a moment, watching the clouds roll in. There was no turning back now. By afternoon, the first signs of pushback appeared. A call from my department head asking if I had accessed confidential records without authorization. Someone had reported unusual activity under my login. My stomach tightened. "I was reviewing internal compliance discrepancies," I said carefully. He paused. "I'd advise you to stay off the system for a few days. There's talk of an audit." After the call, I sat still, heartbeat pounding in my throat. They were already covering their tracks. Someone knew what I had done. That evening, I got home to find an envelope slid under my door. No return address. Inside was a single printed photo. Me at the coffee shop watching Mark outside Hartwell's office. The image was grainy, but clear enough. Beneath it, one sentence typed in block letters. "Stop now or next time it won't be a warning." I sat on the couch, the paper trembling in my hand. Fear washed through me cold and sharp. Then just as quickly, it turned into something harder. I had spent years walking on eggshells around people who thought they could scare me into silence. It wouldn't work anymore. I tore the photo in half and dropped it into the trash. Later that night, I called Ben again. "Did you start looking into Sterling West?" "Yeah," he said. "You were right. Their registered address doesn't match their reported operations. And there's more. The same offshore intermediary is tied to 2 political donations in your dad's district. This isn't just business, Mara. It's corruption." "I figured," I said. "Keep me updated." After the call, I opened my laptop again. I went through the files, adding notes, piecing together a timeline. The longer I worked, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about my family. It was about a network of people who thought power could bury the truth. Outside, rain started again, tapping softly against the windows. I leaned back, exhaustion pulling at me, but beneath it was something steadier. The fear was gone. In its place was resolved. Whatever storm was coming, I was already in it, and I wasn't stepping out. I closed the laptop, stood by the window, and watched the city lights flicker through the rain. Somewhere out there, my dad was still pretending everything was fine, smiling beside the man who would ruin him. Soon enough, that smile would fade, and when it did, I'd be the one holding the truth. 2 days passed before Ben called again. His voice was tense, the kind of tone people use when they know the truth but wish they didn't. "Mara, it's worse than I thought," he said. "Sterling West is just a cover. The offshore accounts connect straight to a holding company in the Bahamas, under Mark's management. He's been funneling your dad's assets there for months. Once it collapses, your dad will take the blame." I felt my stomach turn cold. "You're sure I traced every wire transfer? And one more thing, the anonymous investor backing Mark's fund uses your dad's initials. When this unravels, it'll look like your dad set up the whole thing." I leaned against the counter, eyes on the city lights outside my window. "He's too proud to believe me." "Then get to him before this goes public," Ben said. "After that, it's out of your hands." The call ended, but his words stayed. I spent the rest of the night staring at those same papers, reading each line until the numbers blurred. Then at dawn, I got in the car and drove. The house looked the same from the outside, white siding, green shutters, the porch light still flickering. It was strange how something could look so solid while everything inside it rotted. Dad opened the door before I could knock. His eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, but his voice was sharp. "You shouldn't be here. I have to talk to you," I said. "Please." He hesitated, then stepped aside. I followed him into his study, the same room where he used to help me with math homework when I was a kid. Back then, he'd smell like coffee and cedar, and every problem felt solvable. Now the air smelled like whiskey and burnt ambition. "You've caused enough trouble already," he said without looking at me. "Julia's upset, Mark's furious, you're tearing this family apart." "I'm trying to save it," I said. "You're being used, Dad. Mark's stealing from you. I have documents that prove it." He turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "You've always hated him. I should have known you'd end up like your grandmother, always needing to prove something, never able to just trust anyone." The words hit hard, but I stayed still. "You think this is about trust? It's about evidence. Look at these." I opened the folder and laid out the records across his desk. "These are your signatures. Those are the transfers. He's bleeding you dry." He stared at the pages but didn't move to touch them. "I've made mistakes before, but not this one. Mark's smart. He's been helping me restructure. You've never understood business." "Because I don't measure people by how much money they pretend to have?" asked. He flinched slightly. "You wouldn't understand what it's like to carry a company, to have people depend on you. You left, you divorced. You built a life for yourself and judged the rest of us from a distance." "I built something honest," I said quietly. "And I tried to warn you before it was too late." Julia appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. Her cheeks were flushed, eyes red from crying. "Mark told me you'd do this," she said. "He said you'd try to destroy us because you can't stand that Dad finally has someone to trust." "Julia, he's conning both of you," I said. "I've seen his filings. He's hiding money offshore under fake names." "Please, just look." "You're jealous," she said flatly. "You've always been jealous. Of me, of Dad, of anyone who gets his approval." I took a slow breath. "You're making the same mistake he is. You think loyalty means silence. It doesn't." Dad's voice cut through, quiet but heavy. "Enough. Leave the papers." "I'll look them over." "Dad," I said, stepping closer. "If you don't act now, you'll lose everything." He raised a hand. "Go home, Mara. Before you say something you can't take back." There was no use pushing further. I left the folder on his desk and walked out. Julia's eyes followed me the whole way, full of contempt and something else, fear maybe, though she'd never admit it. Outside, the air was biting cold. I got in the car, hands trembling on the steering wheel. Through the window, I saw them standing together by the study door, their faces half lit by the firelight. I drove away before the image could stick. Halfway down the road, my phone buzzed. A message from Ben. "The SEC is closing in. Someone's trying to move the money fast. You need to be careful. If your dad's involved on paper, he'll be the first target." I read the message twice, then tossed the phone on the seat beside me. Streetlights streaked across the windshield like ribbons of gold in shadow. He had chosen pride over reason. Again. And maybe this time, the fall would finally make him see what he refused to hear. As I reached the edge of town, the clouds began to break, streaks of pale dawn stretching across the sky. It should have felt like relief, but it didn't. The only thing I could feel was the quiet certainty that something irreversible had begun. And this time, I wouldn't be there to stop it. The email from Ben hit just after sunrise. He wrote that a federal inquiry into Sterling West had been opened, that the first subpoenas went out overnight, and that a sealed filing mentioned an unnamed local construction company. My stomach tightened even though I had expected this. He said the Chronicle would publish a brief at noon, nothing sensational, just enough to mark the shift in the wind. He told me to stay off social media and to keep my phone charged. I showered, dressed, and made coffee I barely tasted. The city felt suspended like the moment before a summer storm. By 9, Lisa called from the office. Her voice was a whisper tighter than usual. She said compliance had received formal notice to preserve all records related to Sterling West and affiliated vendors. She added that a request had come in for Ellis Development's vendor approvals, the very contracts I had copied. She asked if I was all right. I said I was fine, that I wanted her to stay out of the middle. She said that would be impossible, and then she said to be careful. At 10, I drove to the ridge above the water and parked. The air had that metallic chill that sits behind the teeth. I watched a tug push a barge through a gray chop and felt strangely steady. I had done what I could. The rest was motion I could not control. My phone buzzed again, a number I did not recognize. I let it ring out. A minute later, a voicemail appeared. I pressed play. It was Julia. Her breath came fast. She said Dad had been served papers at the office and that he was furious. She said reporters were calling. She asked what I had done. She said this was my fault, and then she cried and said, "Please answer." I did not call back. Instead, I sent a text to Ben asking if the Chronicle piece had a timestamp. He said noon sharp. He also said an arrest warrant had been signed in Multnomah County for Mark Reynolds on suspicion of securities fraud and conspiracy. He said that off the record. There was talk of a pickup in Portland as soon as they located him. I read those words twice and then lowered the phone and stared at my reflection in the glass. For a long time, I had imagined this moment as a kind of relief. It did not feel like relief. It felt like a cliff edge with no guardrail, and I was standing on my side of it, choosing not to step forward. Just before noon, I drove past my dad's building. Ellis Development's sign still hung on the brick facade, clean and stubborn. 2 cameras waited across the street, their operators huddled in coats. Lenses pointed at the door. I did not stop. A block later, my phone rang again. It was Dad. I almost did not answer. Then I did. His voice was controlled in that way that meant effort. He said reporters were spreading lies. He said competitors were jealous. He said if I had any decency, I would come to the office and help him set the record straight, because I worked in compliance and people might listen. I said the record would set itself. He said I could still fix this if I would stop being dramatic and think about family. I said my family had asked me not to come home for Christmas. There was a long pause. He said he did what he had to do that night to keep an important guest comfortable. He said it was a strategy. I said he had traded his daughter for optics. He called that an unfair interpretation. Then he said that I had always needed to prove how smart I was and that now I had finally proven that I could destroy things I did not understand. He asked if that felt like a win. I told him there were no wins, only truth. He hung up. The Chronicle pushed the story at 12. The headline was measured. Regional investment firms face federal scrutiny. A subhead noted potential exposure for a partner company in local construction. There were no names in print, but the comments below the article bloomed with guesses, some correct, some reckless. I shut the page. The point of a system is that it does not need my commentary. It needs my patience. At 2, Ben called with a hard edge in his voice. Mark had been picked up at a boutique hotel in Portland trying to leave through a service door. There were photographs already grainy, him half-turned, mouth set in that fixed smile he wore in every press shot. Someone in the lobby had captured video of plainclothes agents guiding him into an elevator. Ben said the footage would be on every local station by evening. He said there would be a press briefing tomorrow. I thanked him and put the phone down gently like it might break. Minutes later, Julia called again. I let it ring twice and then answered. She did not say hello. She said this was all a misunderstanding and that Mark would explain everything after he posted bond. I said a bond does not rewrite ledgers. She said I hated her happiness from the start. I said I had warned her when it still could have been private. She asked if I told the press. I said I provided information to the people whose job is to enforce the law. She said that sounded like a confession. I said it sounded like a sentence I could live with. She said I had ruined Dad. I told her I had put light where it belonged. She began to cry again, smaller this time, like she knew the sound would not work. I did not comfort her. I listened until she was quiet, and then I said she should call a lawyer. By late afternoon, the street by my building filled with a different kind of noise. A car idled too long at the curb. A man stood across the way pretending to check his phone while his eyes tracked every entry. My skin knew the feel of being watched. I drew the curtain and waited for the knock I feared. None came. The envelope slid under my door came instead. Inside was a photocopy of a screenshot, a fragment of an internal message with my name highlighted, and the words, "Preserving all communications." There was a second page with a question written in block letters. How brave are you when the light swings your way? I felt the flash of old fear, and then the newer thing that had learned to stand still while fear moved through and past me. At 5, Lisa sent a secure message. She wrote that a preservation order had expanded to include specific employees, and that I should expect contact. She suggested I retain counsel. She added a line that sounded like something she did not dare to say out loud. She wrote that she was proud of me. I sat with that for a long, quiet minute, and then I opened a search window and looked up a white-collar attorney in Seattle that Ben had recommended once for a different matter. I called. A receptionist answered. I said my name and told her I needed representation regarding a federal inquiry. She said a partner could speak with me at 9 the next morning. She asked me to bring any documentation I had. I nearly laughed. I told her that would not be a problem. Night fell early, as it does in winter, when the day never really wakes up. At 7, my mom called. I had not spoken to her since the holiday. Her voice was softer than I remembered, the way people sound when they are trying to walk across ice. She said your dad is not well. She said he had not eaten, and that he kept walking from room to room, picking things up and setting them down. She asked if I could come by and talk some sense into him because he listens to you when you use that calm voice. I thought of all the years I had used that voice, and of how it had worn smooth, like a river stone, and changed exactly nothing. I told her I could not come tonight. I told her he needed a lawyer, not a daughter. She sighed and said in a small tone that used to fold me in half that I had become such a stranger. I let that pass through me and did not catch it. Around 8, the door buzzer sounded. I froze. It rang again, and then my phone vibrated with a text from a number I had saved. Under Ben. He wrote that a courier was downstairs with hard copies of his findings, and that he did not want to send certain pages electronically. I buzzed the door and waited. The courier was a young woman with windburn on her cheeks. She handed me a thick envelope and left without a word. Inside were printouts highlighted and tabbed. At the very top, a corporate tree pulled in red lines traced the flow from Sterling West to Hartwell Consulting to Ellis Development to the offshore shell and back. There were email fragments that read like routine updates. There were invoices stamped approved. At the bottom of the stack, a copy of a mortgage extension for my parents' house, filed 3 months earlier, collateralized against a future payment from a project controlled by Mark. The page blurred as tears sparked and then receded. My mom had not mentioned that. I called Ben. He answered on the first ring. I asked how he had found the mortgage piece. He said it came from a clerk who owed him and that it was public record if you knew how to look. He said he did not plan to print it unless it became relevant to a defense or a plea. He said he was not trying to set the house on fire. I said I understood and thanked him again. Close to 9, another text arrived. This time it was from a number I did not recognize. It said a single line that carried the weight of surrender. He wants to see you. I knew it was Julia by the rhythm of the words. I wrote back and asked where. She answered that he was at the office, that the lights were off, and that he was sitting in the conference room like he was waiting for a jury that would never show up. She said he would not call me himself. I put on my coat and walked down to the car. The air cut clean and cold against my face. The drive across town felt shorter than ever, like the road had unspooled just for me. When I turned onto the block, no cameras lingered now. The lenses had moved on to Portland and the hotel hallway and the grainy elevator doors. I parked, climbed the steps, and let myself in with the code that had not been changed. The lobby smelled like dust and lemon cleaner. The conference room glass was dark, but inside I could see the shape of my dad, shoulders rounded, hands clasped in front of him on the table. I went in and sat across from him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the slow tick of the wall clock. He said finally that he had read the papers I left. He said he had called a man he trusted and that the man had not called back. He said the bank had left 2 messages he had not returned. He said that when you push long enough, the wall always pushes back. He looked older. Not from years, but from the collapse of a story he had told himself since he was young. I said that the best thing he could do now was tell the truth to the people who would ask. I said that he needed counsel and that he needed to stop speaking to anyone else. I said it without anger. He nodded slowly like he was listening to instructions in a fire drill. He asked me if I had spoken to the press. I said I had spoken to a reporter as a citizen who cares about the law. He closed his eyes for a second and then opened them again. He asked me how I knew he would not listen if I had tried sooner. I said I had tried sooner and he had not listened. He set his hands flat on the table. He said he had wanted so badly to be the man who saved his company that he had stopped being the man who could see a swindle. He said pride is a poor accountant. He said that if he had listened to me, things might have been different. He did not apologize, not then, it was too early for that. It was enough that he was still. We sat like that for a while. Two people whose blood did not guarantee understanding. Two people who had built their lives on opposite sides of a need. When I stood to leave, he asked if I would come back tomorrow after he met with a lawyer. I said I would if he wanted me there to listen, not to be blamed. He nodded once. He looked at the table as if it might answer him. Outside, the night had cleared. Stars pricked the black sky above the buildings. I drew a breath and let it out. My phone buzzed as I reached the car. Another message from Ben. He wrote that the booking photo had just posted, that Mark would be transported north after his first appearance, that more subpoenas would land at dawn. He wrote 3 words at the end. Brace for fallout. I slid the phone into my pocket and looked back at the dark windows of my dad's building. Somewhere inside, the last story he believed about himself was lowering its head. The storm had arrived. The only thing left now was to let it do its work. It was just after midnight when the phone buzzed again. I had been staring at the ceiling for hours, replaying my dad's face in that dim conference room, the way he had looked at me without accusation, just loss. The text was from Ben. They're moving fast. Ellis Development officially named in the affidavit. Brace yourself. I sat up, heart pounding. The world had started shifting beneath our feet, and there was no stopping it now. Outside, the rain was coming down hard, washing the streetlights into long streaks of gold. I turned on the TV, and there it was, the evening broadcast. A reporter stood in front of the Ellis building, microphone in hand, saying words like embezzlement fraud and family ties. They had pictures, too. My dad walked into the building, flanked by his lawyer. Julia, with her coat pulled tight, eyes red, refusing to answer questions. My last name echoed across the screen, like something I didn't recognize anymore. By morning, my inbox was full. Old colleagues, classmates, even distant cousins. Some wrote pity, others curiosity. A few had advice that came wrapped in judgment. I ignored them all. At 9, Ben called again. Your dad's legal team filed a motion to freeze remaining assets, he said. He's not being charged, not yet, but they're circling. What about Mark? He's already talking. Claims your dad authorized every transfer. He's painting himself as a loyal manager following orders. I felt a strange calm settle over me. Then it's time to show them what loyalty really looks like. By noon, I was sitting across from an agent in a small, windowless office downtown. She wore a gray suit and had the patient expression of someone who'd seen too many families like mine. She slid a recorder across the table. Ms. Ellis, can you walk us through how you obtained these documents? I explained. Everything. The night I saw the duplicate ledgers, the offshore accounts, the conversations with Ben. The warnings were ignored. She listened occasionally, jotting notes, occasionally glancing up when my voice trembled. Do you believe your dad knew about the transfers, she asked. I think he wanted to believe in someone else more than he wanted to believe in me, I said. And that's how Mark got in. She nodded, slowly closed her notebook, and said they would be in touch soon. Outside, the sky had cleared. The sun was too bright, like it had no right to be. I walked for blocks before I realized I was heading toward my dad's house. Old habit, maybe instinct. When I pulled up, Julia's car was already there. The curtains were drawn. I hesitated at the porch, then knocked. She opened the door, eyes hollow. He's not talking to anyone, she said. He hasn't eaten since last night. I'm not here to fight, I said. I just need to see him. She stepped aside. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I found him sitting in the living room, still in yesterday's clothes, papers spread across the coffee table. He didn't look up. They froze the accounts, he said softly. 40 years of work, gone in a day. I stood beside the armchair, unsure what to say. It's not gone, Dad. It's just coming into the light. He let out a short, bitter laugh. You think light fixes anything? It just shows how much dirt was there all along. He picked up one of the papers, an official notice, the government seal stamped across the top, and set it back down. I trusted him. I thought he saw me as a partner. Turns out I was just the old fool signing the checks. I knelt beside the chair. You weren't a fool. You just forgot that people who look perfect usually have the most to hide. He finally met my eyes, and for the first time in years, I saw something like understanding there. You did this, he said. Not with anger, with something closer to awe. You went to them. I did, I said quietly. Because you wouldn't listen. He nodded slowly, the corners of his mouth trembling. I suppose that's what I raised you to do. Stand your ground, even when it hurts. We sat in silence for a while. Julia watched us from the doorway, her face unreadable. Eventually, she turned and walked away. When I left, I didn't look back. There was nothing left to say. The air outside was cold and sharp, the kind that wakes you up and cuts clean through the fog. That afternoon, I got a call from the federal office. They wanted me to confirm a few final details for the record. As I spoke, I could hear my own voice steady and sure. The woman on the other end thanked me for my cooperation. She said this kind of bravery wasn't common. I hung up and stood by the window watching the city move. Cars, buses. People are all part of a rhythm that had gone on long before us and would continue long after. Then, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, my phone rang again. It was Ben. It's official, he said. Mark took a plea. He's naming everyone. Your dad's in the clear for criminal charges, but his company will fold. It's over. I closed my eyes, a mix of relief and grief washing through me. Over, I repeated. Are you okay? He asked. I thought about it for a moment. Not yet, I said. But I will be. After we hung up, I stayed by the window until the last of the daylight disappeared. Somewhere far off, a siren wailed, fading into the hum of traffic, and for the first time in years, I let myself breathe without waiting for the next blow. The week after Mark's plea felt like the quiet after a hurricane. The headlines moved on, but the damage stayed. My dad's company was officially shuttered. The staff had been let go, the offices emptied, the sign pulled down. It should have felt like closure, but instead it felt like standing in a room after the lights went out, waiting for your eyes to adjust to the dark. I spent the mornings walking along the waterfront, something I hadn't done in years. The cold air cleared my head better than coffee ever could. I'd replay conversations with my dad, with Julia, with myself. Sometimes I wondered if doing the right thing always made me feel this lonely. One afternoon, as I came home from work, I found a small box on my doorstep. No name, no return address. Inside was an old family photo, the four of us standing in front of the cabin at Lake Chelan. I was maybe 10 hair wild from the wind, holding a fish almost bigger than my arm. My dad was smiling then, hand resting on my shoulder. Julia stood on Mom's other side, her face turned perfectly toward the camera. Underneath the photo was a folded note in my dad's handwriting. It said only, I finally looked at everything. You were right. Thank you. My throat tightened. I sat on the porch step for a long time, holding that paper like it was something fragile. The anger I'd carried for so long started to shift into something else, something quieter. I wasn't ready to call it forgiveness, but it was close. That night I drove to the old Ellis house. The porch light was on, but the windows were dark. Mom answered the door in her robe, eyes tired but soft. She didn't seem surprised to see me. He's in his study, she said. He barely leaves it. I nodded and walked down the hall. The door was open a few inches, and through the crack I saw him sitting at the desk, papers neatly stacked, pen in hand. He looked smaller somehow, not just older. When I pushed the door open, he glanced up. Mara, he said quietly. I wasn't sure you'd come. I wasn't sure either, I said. He motioned to the chair across from him. I wanted to tell you in person. I settled with the employees, sold what was left. The money will cover everyone's severance. I'm keeping nothing. I studied his face. You don't have to explain to me. Yes, I do, he said. I spent too many years explaining things to the wrong people. There was a long pause. Then he said, I read through your reports. Every document, every note you left. I don't know why it took me so long to see it, but I do now. I let my pride blind me. His voice broke slightly on the last words. For a man like him, that was an earthquake. I didn't want to destroy you, Dad, I said. I just couldn't let you keep trusting someone who saw you as a stepping stone. He nodded slowly. You did what I couldn't. You saw through the performance. He took a breath, then added, You remind me of my mom. She had the same stubborn honesty. I used to think it made her hard. Now I think it made her brave. I felt the tears before I could stop them. She would have liked to hear that. He smiled faintly. She would have said it took me long enough. We both laughed quietly. The sound felt strange in that room, like sunlight finding its way through a crack. Before I left, he handed me an envelope. For you, he said. It's not money. It's something better. I opened it in the car. Inside was a deed. The lake cabin. He had signed it over to me. There was a note clipped to it that read, Maybe start new stories there. The next weekend, I drove to the lake. The cabin was dusty, the shutters loose, but the view was the same. The water shimmered silver under the morning sun. I stood on the old dock, remembering the photo, the sound of laughter, the way my dad's voice carried across the water. Later, I lit a fire, made coffee, and sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket. Julia's name flashed on my phone. I hesitated, then answered. Her voice was quiet. He told me what he did, about giving you the cabin. I think it's his way of making peace. I think so too, I said. I'm sorry, she whispered, for not believing you. For everything. I closed my eyes. I know. She was silent for a while. Then she said, Mark's facing 10 years. They said he's already trying to cut another deal. I can't believe I didn't see it. Love makes people blind, I said. It's what he counted on. Are you coming home? She asked. Maybe, I said, but not yet. After we hung up, I sat there, listening to the crackle of the fire and the soft lap of water against the dock. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. As night fell, I stepped outside again. The sky was deep blue, the kind that comes just before full dark. Somewhere out there, the rest of my family was learning how to start over, piece by piece. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like an outsider anymore. I felt like a survivor. The snow returned the following week, soft and steady, like the world had decided to start over in white. I stayed at the cabin longer than I planned. Mornings were slow, quiet. I'd make coffee, wrap myself in my mom's old flannel robe, and sit by the window watching the light crawl across the lake. There was peace in the stillness, a kind that used to make me restless but now felt earned. My dad called every few days. His voice had changed. It carried something lighter, almost humble. He talked about moving into a smaller house near Tacoma, maybe volunteering, maybe finally finishing the memoir he had always threatened to write. Sometimes he'd mention Mom, how she had started tending to the garden again. They were finding their rhythm in the quiet, just like I was. Julia sent me photos of her son, the nephew I barely knew. He had his dad's curls, but her eyes. She said she'd filed for divorce and moved in with Mom for a while. Her messages were softer now, fewer defenses. She thanked me again once late at night for saving her before it was too late. I didn't answer right away. When I finally did, I just wrote, "We all save each other in different ways." I spent my days fixing up the cabin, repaired the dock, scrubbed the old floors, hung new curtains. It felt like reclaiming something that had always been mine but was waiting for me to notice. At night, the silence wrapped around the house like a living thing. I'd sit by the fire, a book in my lap, and think about how far the story had come from that one text message on Christmas night. One morning, a letter arrived from the Department of Justice, a formal notice thanking me for my cooperation and confirming the case's closure. I stared at it for a long time, remembering the fear, the nights awake, wondering if I'd done the right thing. Then I folded it carefully and slipped it into the drawer beside my bed. Some victories are quiet. In late February, I drove back into Seattle for the first time in months. The city felt different, but maybe it was me. I met Ben for lunch at a small cafe downtown. He looked tired, but in that satisfied way people do when their work has meant something. "You ever think about writing it all down?" he asked, halfway through his sandwich. "Maybe," I said, "but who'd believe it?" He smiled. "People don't need to believe it. They just need to feel it." We sat in comfortable silence for a while. When we parted, he said he hoped I'd finally rest. I told him rest was still a work in progress. That night, I visited my parents. The house looked smaller, the way childhood homes always do when the truth has changed their shape. Mom hugged me at the door, her arms thin but steady. My dad was in the living room, the fire lit, a single glass of whiskey on the table. "I thought you might stop by," he said. "I almost didn't," I answered. He smiled faintly. "Then I'm glad you did." We talked for hours, not about the company or the scandal, but about small things. The neighbor's new dog, the book he was reading, Mom's garden coming back to life. Somewhere between those stories, he looked at me and said, "You know, I used to think strength was about control. Now I think it's about letting go at the right time." For once, I didn't have to respond. He already knew I understood. When I left, he walked me to the door. The snow had started again, falling quiet and clean. He touched my shoulder gently and said, "Drive safe, kid." It was simple, ordinary, and everything I had ever wanted to hear. Back at the cabin, the fire crackled as I sat on the floor, watching the snow gather outside. The lake was frozen over the stars, barely visible through the clouds. I thought about how endings aren't clean lines but soft fades. You don't walk away from pain all at once. You step out slowly, one truth at a time. If you've ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power and truth can be the loudest revenge. Truly, if this story touched you, I'd love for you to subscribe, or share your thoughts in the comments. We're almost reaching my dream of the first 1,000 people in our community.